How are you guys doing? Today is Monday, January 10th, 2022. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to review the Elite matchups and performances that took place yesterday on Sunday, January 9th, 2022. As we are entering this brand new calendar year of sports, taking a look at where we are, starting off with football in the college ranks. There's only one college football game left to play, and that is the College Football National Championship game. And that, of course, will be played in Lucas Oil Stadium at 8 o'clock on ESPN. It'll feature the first-ranked Alabama Crimson Tide, who won the SEC championship against Georgia earlier this season. And then they will face off against the third-ranked Georgia Bulldogs, who finished with the best regular season record in the SEC. And this is their second chance to overtake Alabama for the championship that really matters this season. So after that all of the football games for the 2021-2022 season will come to a close. And right after this, I'm going to do a preview for this game specifically how the road at how these two teams got here. Taking a look now what's going on in the collegiate basketball ranks, it's starting to get into its conference schedule. Taking a look at what went down with the 13th ranked team in the nation, the Ohio State Buckeyes hosted the unranked Northwestern Wildcats. Ohio State will go on to beat Northwestern by 8. They won this game 95-87 after they outscored Northwestern by 12 in the first half. On the winning end of this matchup, the Buckeyes were led in scoring by their starting forward, E.J. Liddell. He will go on to finish with 34 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and 5 blocks, all of this in 34 minutes. He shot 12 for 20 from the field, 5 for 7 from 3, and a perfect 5 for 5 from the foul line. Their starting guard, however, Malachi Branham out of Columbus, Ohio, would finish with 24 points, 5 assists, and 3 steals, all of this in 33 minutes. He shot 5 for 8 from the field and 13 for 14 from the foul line. With this win, the 13th ranked Ohio State Buckeyes are now 10-3. They are now 4-1 in the Big Ten. With this loss, the unranked Northwestern Wildcats are now 8-5. They are now 1-3 in the Big Ten, just to get a sense of where they are. Taking a look now at what's going on with the 23rd ranked team in the nation, the Wisconsin Badgers, would go on to face off against the unranked Maryland Terrapins at Maryland. Wisconsin would beat the Terps 70-69. They won this matchup by 1 after they outscored Maryland by 7 in the first half. On the winning end of this matchup, the 23rd ranked Badgers were led in scoring by their starting forward, Tyler Wall out of Minnesota. He will go on to finish with 21 points and 5 rebounds in 30 minutes. He shot 8 for 12 from the field and a perfect 5 for 5 from the foul line. With this win, the 23rd ranked Wisconsin Badgers are now 13-2. They are now 4-1 in the Big Ten. With this loss, the unranked Maryland Terrapins are now 8-7. They are officially 0-4 in the Big Ten as of right now. Taking a look at what's going on with college basketball today, there were no big ranked matchups, as of course I'm going to come at you with the matchups from the top 25 teams. Taking a look at what went down in the pro ranks, jumping to the NFL, yesterday marked the very last day of the 2021-2022 regular season, as the amount of teams competing for the championship dropped from 32 down to 14, as now the 14 playoff teams have been set. I'm taking a look first at what went down in Cleveland. The Cleveland Browns hosted the Cincinnati Bengals. In this matchup, the Cleveland Browns would end up beating the Bengals 21-16. The Browns outscored the Bengals 21-16, or they outscored them 14-7 in the first half. The Bengals outscored the Browns 9-7 in the fourth quarter, and they were still the Browns were still able to keep this game out of reach for them. On the losing end of this matchup, the Bengals were led by their starting quarterback for the day, Brandon Allen, as they had already clinched the playoffs, so they gave Joe Burrow a break. Allen would throw for 136 yards and a touchdown. He also ran for 3. That's 139 total yards of offense. Their leading tackler on the defensive end were Marcus Bailey and Clay Johnston. They each had 11 tackles on the day. Mike Hilton would finish with 2 tackles and the team's lone interception. On the winning winning end of this matchup, the Cleveland Browns were led by Case Keenum. He threw for 176 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. He would also run for 15 yards. There's 191 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher, Dearness Johnson, finished with 25 carries for 123 yards and a touchdown. He also had 10 receiving yards, giving him a total of 133 total yards of offense with his touchdown. And then also their elite running back, Nick Chubb, would have 58 yards on the ground, 2 yards through the air. That's 60 total yards of offense. Cleveland's leading receiver, Jarvis Landry, had 6 receptions for 75 yards and a receiving touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Jacob Phillips finished with 9 tackles and a sack on the day. Jadeveon Clowney, the former number 1 overall pick, would finish with 2 tackles as he had 2 sacks for himself. Their elite defensive end, Myles Garrett, would finish his season with 1 tackle for the day as his 1 tackle was a sack for him. Myles Garrett will go on to finish the season 3rd in the league in sacks as he finished with 16 on the year. With this win, the Cleveland Browns are now 8-9. They did not clinch the playoffs as they had finished with the 3rd best record in the AFC North. As of right now, they are sitting with the 13th overall pick for the 2022 NFL Draft. With this loss, the Cincinnati Bengals are now 10-7. That is the best record in the AFC North. They have officially finished with the division title. They have clinched the 4th seed in the AFC playoff picture as their first matchup will be at home against the Las Vegas Raiders. So, of course, that is how both of these team seasons have come to a close. Taking a look now at what went down in Baltimore, the Ravens hosted the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers would end up beating the Baltimore Ravens 16-13. Both teams would draw at 3 in the first half. Both teams would score 10 points in the second half. But then the Steelers would end this game off of a field goal from exactly 36 yards out from Chris Boswell after Justin Tucker's 46-yard field goal tied the game and sent it into overtime in the first place. On the losing end of this matchup, the Baltimore Ravens, in their final game of the 2021 campaign, would be led by their starting quarterback for the day, Tyler Huntley. Huntley would throw for 141 yards and 2 interceptions. He also ran for 72 yards. That's 123 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher, Latavius Murray, finished with 16 carries for 150 yards and a touchdown. Their leading receiver, Mark Andrews, finished with 8 receptions for 85 yards. On the defensive side of the ball, Chuck Clark finished with 9 tackles on the day. And Geno Stone would finish with the team's lone interception. Not to mention their elite kicker, Justin Tucker, would make both of his field goals, including the 46-yarder that tied the game up in his final game of the season. On the winning end of this matchup, the Pittsburgh Steelers would be led by their starting quarterback, Ben Roethlisberger. Roethlisberger would throw for 244 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. Their leading receiver, Pat Freiermuth, had 6 receptions for 53 yards. On the defensive side of the ball, their leading tacklers were their elite defensive tackle, Cameron Hayward, their elite safety, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and then, of course, their defensive tackle, Chris Wormley. They each had 6 tackles on the day. Hayward finished with a sack as well as he also had 2 tackles for loss. Their elite defensive end, TJ Watt, would finish with 5 tackles as he had a sack for himself. He would finish the 2022 season with the NFL lead for sacks. He finished with 22.5, tying Michael Strahan's single-season record. So, of course, TJ Watt coming off of a virtuoso regular season. And then Cameron Sutton and Terrell Edmonds would have the team's 2 interceptions. Edmonds would have 3 tackles alongside his interception, and then Sutton would finish with 5 tackles alongside his interception. With this win, the Pittsburgh Steelers will finish their 2021 regular season with a 9-7-1 record. That is the second best record in the AFC North, and they clinched the 7th seed in the AFC playoff picture. Their very first matchup will be against the Kansas City Chiefs in Kansas City after the Chiefs won the AFC West. On the losing end of this matchup, the Baltimore Ravens are now 8-9. They would finish the 2021 campaign with the worst record in the AFC North, tied alongside the Cleveland Browns. Going into the 2022 draft, they will have the 12th pick overall. Now taking a look at what went down in Detroit, the Lions hosted the Green Bay Packers, and the Lions would end up beating the Packers in this matchup 37-30, as they were able to end their season on a high note. They would go on to outscore the Packers 17-13 in the first half. They outscored the Packers 20-17 in the second half. As the Packers did have a 3-point lead going into the final 2 minutes, the Lions would take the lead off of a 14-yard touchdown run from DeAndre Swift, and they would get the ball back and then kick another field goal to put them up a touchdown. On the losing end of this matchup, the Green Bay Packers were led by their goated starting quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, out of Cal. He would complete 14 of his 18 passes as he threw for 138 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 7 yards. That's 145 total yards of offense. Their backup quarterback, Jordan Love, would throw for 134 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher, A.J. Dillon, would go on to finish with 63 yards through the air and 4 yards on the ground. 63 yards through the ground and 4 yards through the air. That's 67 yards of offense. Their second leading rusher, Patrick Taylor, had 53 yards on 11 carries. He had a touchdown on the ground. He would also go on to finish with 3 yards through the air. That's 56 total yards of offense with his rushing touchdown. Their leading receiver was Allen Lazard. He had 5 receptions for 75 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. Their second leading receiver, Josiah DeGuara, would finish with 3 receptions for 66 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Their elite wide receiver, Devontae Adams, had 6 receptions for 55 yards. On the defensive side of the ball, Chris Barnes finished with 7 tackles on the day, leading the Packers defense, and they would finish with 1 sack on the day, and that came from Dean Lowry. On the winning end of this matchup, the Detroit Lions were led by their starting quarterback out of Cal, the former number 1 overall pick, Jared Goff. He would throw for 238 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their second leading passer, Tom Kennedy, would go on to throw for 75 yards and a touchdown, as that was his only pass. He also had 16 receiving yards, so he had 91 total yards of offense for himself. Their leading receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown, would finish with 8 receptions for 109 yards and a touchdown. Khalif Raymond, their second leading receiver, had 4 receptions for 101 yards and a touchdown. Their third leading receiver, Khalif Raymond also had 13 rushing yards, so Khalif Raymond would have 114 total yards of offense. Brock Wright, their third leading receiver, had 2 receptions for 51 yards as he had a receiving touchdown as well. On the defensive side of the ball for Detroit, Tracy Walker III would lead the game in tackles as he had 14. Julian Okwara would finish with 3 tackles as he had 2 of the team's 4 sacks. C.J. Moore and Tracy Walker would each finish with an interception as well. Tracy Walker, along with his interception coming along his 14 sacks, would have a very impressive defensive day. And then C.J. Moore would finish with 1 tackle alongside his interception. With this win, the Detroit Lions will finish their 2021 season with a 3-13-1 record. They are going into the 2022 offseason with the 2nd overall pick in the draft, sitting right behind the Jacksonville Jaguars. That loss being what did it for them. And then, of course, on the losing end of this matchup, the Green Bay Packers are now 13-4. That is the best record in the NFC North, of course, and they will go into the playoffs with the number 1 seed in the NFC, meaning that they will get a first-round bye, and they will face off against the lowest seed that comes out of the wild card round. And then taking a look now at what went down in Houston, the Houston Texans hosted the Tennessee Titans. The Tennessee Titans would go on to beat the Texans 28-25 to win the AFC South. The Texans were outscored 21-0. They were shut out, actually, before they outscored Tennessee 25-7 in the second half. As the Texans never really took a lead in this game. But on the losing end, they were led by Davis Mills. Mills threw for 301 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also ran for 12 yards. That's 313 yards of offense. Their leading receiver, Danny Amendola, would end up he would end up with 7 receptions for 113 yards, and he had 2 receiving touchdowns. On the defensive side of the ball, Tavier Thomas finished with 9 tackles, leading the team. On the winning end of this matchup, the Tennessee Titans were led by their starting quarterback, Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill threw for 287 yards and 4 touchdowns. Their leading rusher, Deontay Foreman, had 21 carries for 69 yards. Their leading receiver, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, would finish with 4 receptions for 78 yards as he had a receiving touchdown. A.J. Brown would finish with 4 receptions for 68 yards as he had a receiving touchdown on the day. Their future Hall of Fame wide receiver, Julio Jones, would finish with 5 receptions for 58 yards as he caught his lone receiving touchdown of the 2021 season just yesterday. Anthony Firkser would finish with 4 receptions for 56 yards as he had a receiving touchdown as well. On the defensive side of the ball, Zach Cunningham would lead the Titans in tackles as he had 10 of them. And then with this win, the Tennessee Titans will finish their season with a 12-5 record. That is the best record in the AFC South, and they go into the playoffs with the number 1 seed, meaning that they clinch the first round bye, and they will face off against the team with the lowest seed that wins their wild card matchup. So that is where the Tennessee Titans are sitting. And of course, they have bought their elite running back, Derrick Henry, some time to possibly come back from injury. With this loss, the Houston Texans are now 4-13. They finish with the 3rd best record in the AFC South. They will go into the draft with the 3rd overall pick. So that's where their season was, as they finished a game better than Jacksonville. Taking a look now at what went down in Jacksonville, speaking of the Jaguars hosted the Indianapolis Colts. And in their final game, the Jaguars would beat the Colts 26-11, and they will go on to clinch the number 1 draft pick for the 2022 draft, making it the 2nd year in a row. They would go on to outscore the Colts 13-3 in the first half, and then they outscored the Colts 13-8 in the second half. On the losing end, the Colts were led by their starting quarterback, Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz would end up throwing for 185 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. He also ran for 17 yards. That's 202 total yards of offense. Their elite running back, Jonathan Taylor, would finish with a 15 carry, 77 yard on the ground game. And then he would also have 18 yards through the air. He will go on to finish with 95 total yards of offense. He will finish his 2021 season with the NFL lead in rushes with 332. He finished with the league lead in rushing yards as he had 1,811 yards in 17 games, or in a 17-game season. And he also finished with the NFL lead in rushing touchdowns as he finished with 18 on the ground. And he was able to add 360 receiving yards through the air, giving him over 2,100 total yards of offense alongside his 20 touchdowns. So this will be quite a season for Jonathan Taylor. And taking a look going down on the defensive side, their leading tackler was Kenny Moore II. He finished with 10 of them on the day. Their elite linebacker, Darius Leonard, would finish with 7 tackles on the day. He would go on to finish his 2021 season with 75 total solo tackles. He would lead the NFL in forced fumbles as he finished with 8 forced fumbles on the year. And then on the winning end of this matchup, the Jacksonville Jaguars were led by their elite young quarterback, the number 1 overall pick in last year's draft, Trevor Lawrence. He would complete 23 of his 32 passes as he threw for 223 yards and 2 touchdowns. He would also run for 17 yards as he finished with 240 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver, Marvin Jones Jr., had 7 receptions for 88 yards and a touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, the Jaguars' leading tackler was Tyson Campbell. He had 8 of them on the day. Josh Allen finished with 4 tackles as he had 2 sacks, as Josh Allen would finish his season with 7.5 on the year. With this win, the Jacksonville Jaguars are 3-14. They finish with the league's worst record as they go into the 2022 offseason with the number 1 overall pick going into the 2022 draft, so they are officially on the clock. With this loss, the Indianapolis Colts are now 9-8. They failed to make the playoffs as they will go into the 2022 draft with the 17th overall pick. They finished with the 2nd best record in the AFC South. Now, taking a look at what went down in Minneapolis, the Minnesota Vikings hosted the Chicago Bears. The Vikings would beat the Bears 31-17. They won this matchup after the Bears outscored them 14-3 in the first half. The Vikings would outscore the Bears 28-3 in the second half to come back from behind and win. They would tie the game at the beginning of the fourth quarter, of course, off of a 45-yard touchdown pass from Kirk Cousins to Justin Jefferson. And then Kirk Cousins would throw a touchdown at KJ Osborne on the next drive to give them a touchdown lead. And then it would be a pick 6 from their future Hall of Fame cornerback, Patrick Peterson, to put them up by 2 touchdowns to give them the 3-touchdown fourth quarter they needed to pull off this very impressive win, despite the fact that they didn't make the playoffs. On the losing end of this matchup, the Bears were led by their starting quarterback out of TCU, Andy Dalton. Dalton threw for 325 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. He also ran for 7 yards as 332 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher was David Montgomery out of Iowa State. He had 20 carries for 72 yards on the ground. He also had 7 yards through the air. That's 79 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver was Darnell Mooney. He had 12 receptions for 126 total yards of offense. On the defensive side of the ball, their leading tackler was Roquan Smith. He finished with 6 tackles on the day. On the winning end of this matchup, the Minnesota Vikings were led by their starting quarterback, Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins would end up throwing for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns. Their leading rusher, Dalvin Cook, had 14 carries for 79 yards on the ground. Their leading receiver was their elite wide receiver, Justin Jefferson. He had 5 receptions for 107 yards as he finished with a touchdown on the day. He will go on to finish his season with 1,616 yards as he would finish second in the league in receiving yards. He finished 4th in the league in receptions as he had 108 of them. And he was tied 6th in the league in receiving touchdowns as he would finish with 10 of them, as he came close to Randy Moss's single-season receiving record for the Vikings. And then also in their receiving core, Amir Smith-Marset finished with 3 receptions for 103 yards as he had a receiving touchdown as well. Anthony Barr, who went to the same high school I did, he finished with 11 tackles on the day as he finished with 2 sacks. DJ Wanham finished with 7 tackles as he had 2 sacks as well. Patrick Peterson finished with 7 tackles as he had a 66-yard pick 6. And Blake Lynch would finish with the team's other interception as he would not finish with a tackle for himself. Regardless, with this win, the Minnesota Vikings they will finish their 2021 season with an 8-9 record. They failed to make the playoffs, and they are going into the 2022 offseason with the 14th overall pick in the upcoming draft. With this loss, the Chicago Bears will finish their season with a 6-11 record. They go into the offseason with the 7th overall pick in the upcoming draft. Taking a look now at what went down in New York, the Giants hosted the Washington football team, and hopefully the last game that they will be referred to as the Washington football team. And Washington would end up beating New York 22-7. They shut New York out for the first 3 quarters, outscoring them 12-0, and then outscoring New York by 10-7 in the fourth quarter. On the losing end of this matchup, the New York Giants were led by their starting quarterback, Jake Fromm, in passing and rushing. He threw for 103 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. He would also run for 53 yards as he had 156 total yards of offense on the day. Their leading tackler on the defensive side was Tate Crowder. He finished with 12 tackles on the day. Their second leading tackler, Lorenzo Carter, had 10 tackles as he had a sack. On the winning end of this matchup, Washington was led by their starting quarterback, Taylor Heinicke. He threw for 120 yards, and he also ran for 3. That's 123 yards of offense. Their leading rusher, Antonio Gibson, would finish with 21 carries for 146 yards as he had a touchdown. He also had 5 yards through the air. Antonio Gibson would finish 6th in the league in rushing yards as he had 1,037 on the year. So that would be very solid for him, as he also finished 4th in the league in carries. He had 258 of them. Through the air, their leading receiver was Terry McLaurin. He had 4 receptions for 93 yards on the day, as he finished 20th in the league in receiving yards. He had 1,053 of them, so he would have a 1,000-yard receiving season. On the defensive side of the ball, Cole Holcomb would lead the team in tackles, as he would finish with 11 of them on the day. And then Bobby McCain on the defensive side would finish with 2 interceptions, as one of them was a pick 6, just to get a sense of how he was playing. He didn't finish with a tackle at all. With this win, Washington will finish their season with a 7-10 record. That is the 3rd best record in the NFC East. They will go into the offseason with the 11th overall pick in the upcoming draft. With this loss, the New York Giants are now 4-13. That is the worst record in the NFC East, and they will go into the 2022 offseason with the 4th overall pick in the draft. Taking a look now at what is going down in Atlanta, the Atlanta Falcons hosted the New Orleans Saints in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the final game of the season. The Saints would end up beating the Falcons 30-20, as the Saints were still unable to squeeze their way into the playoffs. The Saints would outscore the Falcons 24-6 in the first half. The Falcons outscored the Saints 14-6 in the second half. On the losing end, the Atlanta Falcons were led by their starting quarterback, possible future Hall of Famer Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan threw for 216 yards, a touchdown, and an interception, as he would jump to 9th overall in all-time passing yards. He also ran for 2 yards, so that's 218 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver, Russell Gage, finished with 9 receptions for 126 yards, as he had a receiving touchdown. Their leading tackler, Foyesade Olokun, finished with 13 tackles. Sean Williams finished with 11 tackles himself. And then on the winning end of this matchup, the New Orleans Saints were led by their starting quarterback, Taysom Hill. He threw for 107 yards and a touchdown. He ran for 18 additional yards. That's 125 yards of offense. Trevor Siemian would throw for 71 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their elite running back, Alvin Kamara, would finish with 30 carries for 146 yards on the ground. He also had 16 yards through the air. That's 162 total yards of offense. Kamara would finish with 848 yards through the air, as he also finished with 439 yards, or 898 yards on the ground and 439 through the air. That's over 1,200 yards of total offense for the season, as he finished with 9 touchdowns total. Through the air, their leading receiver was Traquan Smith. He had 5 receptions for 76 yards, as he had a receiving touchdown. And then their leading tacklers were Demario Davis and Paulson Adebo. Marcus Davenport would finish with 2 tackles, as he finished with a sack and a half. And then Adebo, in addition to finishing tied for the team high in tackles with 5, he also finished with the team's lone interception. With this win, the New Orleans Saints finished their 2021 season with a 9-8 record, as they are the last draft pick out of the teams that didn't qualify for the playoffs. They go in with the 18th overall pick. With this loss, the Atlanta Falcons are now 7-10. They finished with the 3rd best record in the NFC South. They go into the 2022 draft with the 9th overall pick. Taking a look now at what is going down in Buffalo, the Bills would finish their AFC East title season with a 27-10 home win over the New York Jets, as they would go on to clinch their division title for the 2nd year in a row. They would go on to outscore the Jets 13-7 in the first half, and they outscored the Jets 14-3 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the New York Jets were led by the 2nd overall pick in last year's draft out of BYU, Zach Wilson. He threw for 87 yards and a touchdown. He was also the team's leading rusher. He had 24 yards on the ground. He finished with 111 total yards of offense for the Jets. Their leading receiver, Keelan Cole, had 3 receptions for 54 yards, as he had the team's lone receiving touchdown. C.J. Mosley out of Alabama was the team's leading tackler. He would finish with 13 of them on the day. He would finish 2nd in the NFL in total tackles, as he had 104 of them on the year. And then on the winning end of this matchup, the Buffalo Bills were led by their elite starting quarterback, Josh Allen, out of Wyoming. He would complete 24 of his 45 passes, as he threw for 239 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also had 5 carries for 63 yards. He would go on to finish with 303 total yards of offense on the day, as both of his touchdowns came through the air. Their leading rusher was Devin Singletary. He finished with 19 carries for 88 yards, as he had a touchdown. He also had 24 yards through the air and an additional touchdown. He will go on to finish with 112 total yards of offense and 2 touchdowns. Their leading receiver was their elite wide receiver, Stephon Diggs. Diggs finished with 9 receptions for 81 yards and a receiving touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, Greg Rousseau and Tremaine Edmonds would lead the team in tackles. They each had 5 of them. Mario Addison and Jordan Poyer would finish with 4 tackles, as they each had 2 sacks. Ed Oliver finished with 4 tackles, as he had a sack and a half. With this win, the Buffalo Bills are now 11-6. They finished their season with the best record in the AFC East. They will go into the 2022 playoff picture with the third seed in the playoffs. They will face off at home against the New England Patriots from within their own division. With this loss, the New York Jets are now 4-13. They failed to make the playoffs as they had the worst record in the AFC East. They go into the offseason with the fifth overall pick in the draft, right behind their neighbors, the New York Giants, who have the 4th overall pick. Taking a look now at what is going down in Miami, the Miami Dolphins hosted the New England Patriots. The Dolphins would end up beating the Patriots 33-24. The Dolphins would win this matchup by 9. They outscored the Patriots 17-7 in the first half, and then the Patriots outscored the Dolphins 17-16 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the New England Patriots were led by their starting quarterback, Mac Jones, out of Alabama. Mac Jones threw for 261 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. He also ran for 4 yards. That's 265 yards of offense. Their leading receiver, Hunter Henry, would finish with 5 receptions for 86 yards on the day. Their leading rusher, Brandon Bolden, had 7 carries for 46 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He had 2 receptions for 20 yards and another touchdown through the air. That's 66 total yards of offense with his touchdowns. Their second leading rusher, Damian Harris, had 11 carries for 37 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He also had 36 yards through the air. That combines for 73 total yards of offense. And on the defensive side of the ball, the Patriots were led in tackles by Jawan Bentley. He led the game. He had 17 of them. Adrian Phillips would finish with 11 tackles for himself. On the winning end of this matchup, the hometown Miami Dolphins were led by their elite starting quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. Tagovailoa would complete 15 of his 22 passes as he threw for 109 yards and a touchdown. He would also run for 38 yards. That's 147 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher, Duke Johnson, would finish with 25 carries for 117 yards and a touchdown. He also had 5 yards through the air. That's 122 yards of offense. Their leading tackler, Brandon Jones, had 8 tackles on the day. And then Xavier Howard, their elite corner, would finish with a pick 6, of course, to end off his season. He would finish with 3 tackles on the day. He would finish with 5 interceptions on the year, tied for 4th in the NFL. And his 16 passes defended were tied for 16th in the league. With this win, the Miami Dolphins are now 9-8. They finished with the 3rd best record in the 2021 season in the AFC East. They failed to qualify for the playoffs, and they go into the 2022 offseason with the 16th overall pick in the upcoming draft. With this loss, the New England Patriots are now 10-17. That is now, or they finished with the 2nd best record in the AFC East, as they had actually clinched a playoff spot for themselves. They clinched the 6th seed in this playoff picture as they will face off against the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo for their next matchup. Taking a look now at what's going down in Tampa, the defending Super Bowl champs hosted the Carolina Panthers in this final matchup. The Buccaneers would beat the Panthers 41-17. They outscored the Panthers 10-7 in the first half. They outscored the Panthers 31-10 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Carolina Panthers were led by their starting quarterback out of USC, Sam Darnold. Darnold would throw for 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. He also ran for 19 yards. That's 238 total yards of offense. Their leading receiver, DJ Moore, out of Maryland, finished with 7 receptions for 87 yards. Their third leading receiver, Robbie Anderson, had 7 receptions for 50 yards as he had a receiving touchdown for himself. Finishing off the season, DJ Moore would finish with 1,157 yards as he finished 11th in the NFL, as he finished with he finished with 93 receptions as well. That's a solid season, plus 90 plus receiving yards and 1,100 plus receiving yards on the year. On the defensive side of the ball, Miles Hartsfield led the Panthers in tackles as he finished with 12 on the day. And then On the winning end of this matchup, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would be led by their goated starting quarterback, Tom Brady. Brady would complete 29 of his 37 passes as he threw for 326 yards and 3 touchdowns. Their leading receiver, Rob Gronkowski, had 7 receptions for 137 yards. Their elite wide receiver, Mike Evans, would finish with 6 receptions for 89 yards as he had 2 receiving touchdowns. Mike Evans would be the first NFL player in history with over 1,000 yards in his first 8 seasons in the league. He finished with 74 receptions. He tied for 29th in the league. He finished with 1,035 receiving yards, which is 23rd in the league. And he finished second in the NFL in receiving touchdowns as he had 14 of them. So that's how Mike Evans' season would come to a close. And on the defensive side of the ball for the Buccaneers, they were led in tackles by Antoine Winfield Jr. as he had 8 of them. He also had a sack and recovered a fumble, playing Superman today. And then Andrew Adams would finish with the team's lone interception as he did not finish with a tackle. With this win, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers finished their 2021 season with a 13-4 record. That is the best record in the NFC South as they are the only team from the division to make the playoffs. Going in, they have the 2nd seed overall. Their first matchup will be at home as they face off against the Philadelphia Eagles, making it their 2nd straight playoff game at home. Of course, the last one being the Super Bowl that they won. With this loss, the Carolina Panthers are now 5-12. That is the worst record in the NFC South for the season. And going into the playoffs, they are getting ready to see what they need to do with the 6th overall pick in the 2021 season, just to give a sense, or in the 2022 draft, just to get a sense of how the Panthers season finished. Taking a look now at what went down in Phoenix, the Arizona Cardinals hosted the Seattle Seahawks for the season finale. The Seahawks would end up beating the Cardinals 38-30. They outscored the Cardinals 17-10 in the first half, and then they outscored the Cardinals 21-20 in the second half in order to come back and win. The Seahawks had to tie the game after the Arizona Cardinals took the lead in the third. They tied it off of a 25-yard touchdown pass from Russell Wilson to Freddie Swain at the end of the third. The Seahawks took the lead off of a 4-yard touchdown run from Russell Wilson, and they ran away with that lead as they outscored the Cardinals 14-6 in the fourth quarter. On the losing end of this matchup, the Arizona Cardinals were led by their elite starting quarterback out of Oklahoma, Kyler Murray. Murray would complete 28 of his 39 passes as he threw for 240 yards and a touchdown. He also ran for 35 yards. That's 275 total yards of offense. Their leading rusher was their Pro Bowl running back James Conner. He finished with 15 carries for 52 yards as he had a rushing touchdown. Their leading receiver was Zach Ertz. He had 7 receptions for 84 yards for the day. James Conner also had 6 receptions for 41 yards and a touchdown through the air. I missed that earlier. So he had 93 total total yards of offense as he had 2 total touchdowns. On the defensive side of the ball, Isaiah Simmons and Jalen Thompson finished with the team high in tackles as they each finished with 6 of them. Jalen Thompson also finished with the team's lone interception. On the winning end of this matchup, the Seattle Seahawks will finish their season, they finished their season on the back of Russell Wilson. Their elite starting quarterback would complete 15 of his 26 passes as he threw for 238 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. He ran for 5 yards and an additional touchdown. He had 243 total yards of offense with his 4 touchdowns. Their leading rusher, Rashad Penny, had 23 carries for 190 yards as he finished with the other rushing touchdown on the day for the team. Their leading receiver, Tyler Lockett, had 5 receptions for 98 yards as he had 2 receiving touchdowns. Their elite wide receiver, DK Metcalf, had 5 receptions for 58 yards as he was 33 yards away from another 1,000-yard receiving season. Their leading tackler on the defensive end was Jordan Brooks. He finished with 20 tackles on the day as he finished with the league lead in total tackles. He finished with 108 of them. Also sitting alongside him was Cody Barton. He finished with 12 tackles on the day. And then Josh Jones finished with 10. With this win, the Seattle Seahawks finished their 2021 season with a 7-10 record. But of course, going back up to how they fared on the defensive line, my bad. Poona Ford finished with 4 tackles as he had a sack and a half. Carlos Dunlap II finished with 3 tackles as he had 2 sacks. But now going back to their win total. With this win, the Seattle Seahawks finished their 2021 season with a 7-10 record. That is the worst record in the NFC West for the season. Going into the offseason, they are preparing for the 10th overall pick in this upcoming NFL draft. With this loss, the Arizona Cardinals finished their season with an 11-6 record. They finished with the best record, or the second best record in the NFC West, as they clinched the top wild card spot. They finished a game worse than the LA Rams, but right now they're preparing to face off against the LA Rams for their very first playoff matchup, as that matchup will take place in Los Angeles. So that is how that matchup shaped up. And taking a look now at what is going on in Los Angeles. Speaking of the Rams hosted the 49ers. The Niners would end up beating the Rams 27-24 in overtime. The Rams outscored the Niners 17-3 in the first half. The Niners outscored the Rams 21-14 in the second half, or 21-7 in the second half. The Niners would win this game after they came all the way from behind as they won it on a 24-yard field goal from Robbie Gould. They were down 17-3 going into the third quarter, and they were able to pull off a very big come-from-behind win. And with this win, they were able to clinch a playoff spot as well. But with this loss, the LA Rams were led by their starting quarterback, Matthew Stafford. Stafford threw for 238 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Their leading receiver, Cooper Kupp, their elite wide receiver, Cooper Kupp, finished with 7 receptions for 118 yards and a touchdown. He will go on to finish the season with the NFL lead in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. He had 145 yards for 1,947 receiving yards and 16 touchdowns. All of those are, of course, career highs for him, as Cooper Kupp may win the Offensive Player of the Year for his amazing season this year. He will go on to finish with 7 receptions for 118 yards and a touchdown. Their second leading receiver, Tyler Higbee, finished with 6 receptions for 55 yards and the other 2 receiving touchdowns for the team. Travin Howard, Taylor Rapp, and Troy Reeder each finished with 8 tackles on the day. Troy Reeder finished with a sack alongside his 8 tackles. Their elite corner, Jalen Ramsey, would finish with an interception, as he would finish with 3 tackles as well. Taylor Rapp would finish with an interception alongside his 8 tackles. Their elite defensive end, Von Miller, would finish with 5 tackles as he had a sack. He finished this season with 9.5 sacks on the season, half a sack away from yet another double-digit season. Aaron Donald would finish his season with 7 tackles on the day. He finished with 12.5 sacks for the year, just to get a sense of where he finished. He finished tied 7th in the NFL, as he submitted yet another season to prove why he's one of the best to ever play the game. On the winning end of this matchup, the San Francisco 49ers were led by their starting quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo. Garoppolo threw for 316 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher, Elijah Mitchell, had 21 carries for 85 yards. And then their leading receiver, Brandon Ayuk, had 6 receptions for 107 yards. Jawan Jennings, their third leading receiver, had 6 receptions for 94 yards, and both of the teams receiving touchdowns. And their second leading receiver and their second leading rusher, Deebo Samuel, had 45 yards off 8 carries and a touchdown on the ground. He had 95 yards through the air, so that's 140 total yards of offense for Deebo Samuel for the day, with his rushing touchdown. Their leading tackler was Dre Greenlaw. He had 12 tackles on the day. Eric Armstead finished with 7 tackles as he had 2.5 sacks. Emmanuel Mosley and Ambry Thomas finished with the team's 2 interceptions. And then going back to Deebo Samuel, he would go on to finish 5th in the NFL in receiving yards as he had 1,405, and he also had 6 receiving touchdowns. And then adding what he did rushing on the ground, he did finish with 365 yards. That's 1,770 total yards of offense for Deebo Samuel for the season. So this this will be a virtuoso season specifically for Deebo Samuel. I will point out what a season he's had. With this win, the San Francisco 49ers will finish their 2021 season with a 10-7 record. That was the third best record in the NFC West. They clinched the 6th seed in the NFC playoff picture as their next matchup will be against the Dallas Cowboys in Dallas. With this loss, the LA Rams will finish their season with a 12-5 record. They finished with the 4th seed in the playoff picture as their next matchup will be a home matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, who play within their own division, the NFC West. Taking a look now at what's going on with the Las Vegas Raiders, last but not least, the Raiders hosted the LA Chargers, and in this matchup where the winner would go to the playoffs and the loser would go home, the Raiders would go on to clinch that 5th seed in the playoff picture as the Los Angeles Chargers would be the team to go home. The LA Chargers would get outscored by the Raiders 17-14 in the first half. Taking a look at how the second half went, the Raiders would outscore the Chargers 15-12 in the second half. The Chargers outscored the Raiders 15-12 in the second half. All 14 of their points coming in the fourth quarter. They were down 21-14 with about 8 minutes left to go, even as far as 4.5 minutes left. Justin Herbert would throw a touchdown pass to Josh Palmer to put them a touchdown down. Mike Williams would catch a touchdown from Justin Herbert to tie the game up on the very last play of the game. The Raiders would end up kicking a field goal to take the lead in overtime. The Chargers tied it up. And then on the last play of overtime, the Raiders would end up kicking the field goal to put them through, giving them what they needed. Even though a tie for both teams would have put them in the playoffs, or very well could have. Taking a look at how the Chargers fared on the losing end of this wild game of the year, they were led by their elite starting quarterback, Justin Herbert. He completed 34 of his 64 pass attempts as he threw for 383 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Their leading rusher, Austin Eckler, had 16 carries for 64 yards and a touchdown, as he would also have 35 yards through the air. That's 99 total yards of offense. He also had a receiving touchdown. So we had 2 total touchdowns on the day. Their leading receiver, Mike Williams, had 9 receptions for 119 yards and a touchdown. Jared Cook had 4 receptions for 80 yards. Justin Herbert would finish with 5,014 passing yards on the season. He finished second in the NFL in passing yards. He threw for 38 touchdowns. He finished third in the league. That was how, of course, his season came to an end. On the defensive side of the ball, the Chargers were led by Nasir Adderley in tackles. He had 10 of them. Derwin James, their elite safety, would finish with 9 tackles on the day. He would finish with 75 solo tackles on the year as he had an impressive season as he came back from injury in a big fashion this year. Also, in their elite's defensive end, Joey Bosa would finish with 2 tackles on the day as he had a sack. He would finish his 2021 campaign with 10.5 sacks. He was tied for second in the NFL in forced fumbles with 7, so he would put together a very solid end of the season for himself. On the winning end of this matchup, the LV Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders, were led by their starting quarterback, Derek Carr. He threw for 186 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was their elite running back, Josh Jacobs. He had 26 carries for 132 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He had 12 yards through the air. That's 144 total yards of offense. Jacobs would finish with 872 yards on the ground and 348 through the air as he finished with roughly 1,200 yards of offense for the Raiders to help them get to the playoffs this season. Their leading receiver, Bryan Edwards, had 4 receptions for 63 yards. Their leading tackler was Denzel Perryman. He had 9 tackles on the day. Their Pro Bowl defensive end, Max Crosby, finished with 6 tackles as he had 2 sacks. He would finish this season with 8 sacks on the year. Casey Hayward Jr. would finish with the team's lone interception as he had 3 tackles as well. With this win, the Las Vegas Raiders finished their 2021 season with a 10-7 record. That is the second best record in the AFC West. And they are going into the playoff picture with the 5th seed. And their very next matchup will be against the Cincinnati Bengals in Cincinnati. With this loss, the LA Chargers are now 9-8. That is the 3rd best record in the AFC West. As they failed to make the playoffs with this loss, they go into the 2021 2022, offseason with the 15th overall pick in the draft, as they have to be focused on the next draft because they are no longer in the playoff hunt anymore. So those are all the matchups that took place yesterday. And of course, as we inch closer to the wild card round, I'm going to give a preview for the teams there. But now I think it's worth noting that the NFL has now shrunk in size from 32 to 14. And I'm also going to follow this episode up with season leaders or with statistical leaders just to give you a sense of how the season has gone. Now, taking a look at what's going on in the NBA, looking at yesterday's matchups. Starting off in Brooklyn, the Nets hosted the San Antonio Spurs. The Nets would beat the Spurs 121 to 119 after outscoring the Spurs 8-6 in overtime. On the losing end, the Spurs were led in scoring by their starting shooting guard, Lonnie Walker IV. He finished with 25 points in 33 minutes. He shot 9 for 20 from the field, 3 for 8 from 3, and 4 for 6 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Brooklyn Nets were led in scoring by their goated starting power forward, Kevin Durant. Durant finished with 28 points, 4 rebounds, 6 assists, and 3 blocks in 43 minutes. He shot 11 for 21 from the field, 1 for 5 from 3, and a perfect 5 for 5 from the foul line. Their elite starting shooting guard, James Harden, finished with 26 points, 7 rebounds, and 12 assists, as well as 6 turnovers in 44 minutes. He shot 9 for 18 from the field, 2 for 5 from 3, and he shot 6 for 7 from the foul line. With this win, the Brooklyn Nets are now 25-13. That is the second best record in the Eastern Conference, as they've won 5 of their last 10 games. They trail the first seed Chicago Bulls by a game and a half in the conference. With this loss, the San Antonio Spurs are now 15-14. That is the 10th best record in the Western Conference, as they are tied with the Portland Trail Blazers. The Spurs have lost their last 2 games, and they've lost 6 of their last 10. They trailed the 8th seed Minnesota Timberwolves by 4.5 games outside of the playoff picture. Taking a look at what went down in the Crypto.com arena, the LA Clippers hosted the Atlanta Hawks. The Clippers would end up beating the Hawks in this first matchup in LA, 106-93. They would win this game by 13 after they outscored the Hawks by 8 in the first quarter, and by 7 in the third. On the losing end of this matchup, the Atlanta Hawks were led in scoring by their elite starting point guard, Trae Young, and their starting shooting guard, Bogdan Bogdanovic. Trae Young finished with 19 points, 3 rebounds, 7 assists, and 2 steals in 34 minutes. He shot 8 for 21 from the field, 1 for 6 from 3, and a perfect 2 for 2 from the foul line. Bogdanovic finished with 19 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 steals in 31 minutes. He shot 8 for 16 from the field and 3 for 8 from 3. On the winning end of this matchup, the LA Clippers were led in scoring by their starting shooting guard, Amir Coffey. Coffey would finish with 21 points and 5 rebounds in 33 minutes. He shot 8 for 12 from the field, and he shot 5 for 8 from 3. With this win, the LA Clippers are now 20-21. That is the 9th best record in the Western Conference, as they've won 4 of their last 10. They sit half a game behind the 8th seed Minnesota Timberwolves in the West. With this loss, the Atlanta Hawks are 17-22. That is the 4th worst record in the East. They've lost their last 2 games, and they've lost 7 of their last 10. They currently sit 3.5 games behind the 8th seed Charlotte Hornets in the Eastern Conference. Taking a look now at what went down in Orlando, the Orlando Magic, the holders of the worst record in basketball, hosted the Washington Wizards. The Wizards would end up beating the Magic 102-100. They won this matchup by 2 after they outscored the Magic by 4, or they outscored them by 6 in the fourth quarter to overcome their 4-point deficit, and by 9 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Orlando Magic were led in scoring by their starting by their shooting guard off the bench, Terrence Ross. He finished with 32 points in 31 minutes as he shot 13 for 20 from the field, 2 for 4 from 3, and he shot 4 for 5 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Washington Wizards were led in scoring by their starting small forward out of Utah, Kyle Kuzma. Kuzma finished with 27 points and 22 rebounds in 38 minutes. He shot 10 for 19 from the field, 3 for 6 from 3, and 4 for 6 from the foul line. Their elite starting shooting guard, Bradley Beal, finished with 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 7 assists in 37 minutes. He shot 7 for 22 from the field, 3 for 7 from 3, and 3 for 4 from the foul line. With this win, the Washington Wizards are now 20-20. That is the 9th best record in the East, as they've won 5 of their last 10 games. They sit 1 game behind the 8th seed Charlotte Hornets outside of the playoff picture. With this loss, the Orlando Magic are now 7-34. That is the worst record in the NBA. They've lost their last 9 games. That is the worst losing streak in the NBA as well. They've lost 9 of their last 10 because that's how a 9-game losing streak works. And they sit 14 and a half games behind the 8th seed Charlotte Hornets outside of the playoff picture in the Eastern Conference. Taking a look now at what's going down north of the border in Toronto, the Raptors hosted the New Orleans Pelicans. The Raptors would end up beating the Pelicans 105-101. They won this matchup by 4 after outscoring the Pelicans by 3 in the second half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Pelicans were led in scoring by their elite starting small forward out of Duke, Brandon Ingram. Ingram finished with 22 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists in 35 minutes. He shot 6 for 13 from the field, 1 for 2 from 3, and 9 for 10 from the foul line. Their starting center, Jonas Valanciunas, finished with 20 points and 17 rebounds in 34 minutes. He shot 7 for 12 from the field, 1 for 3 from 3, and he shot 5 for 6 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Toronto Raptors were led in scoring by their starting shooting guard, Fred VanVleet. VanVleet finished with 32 points and 2 steals in 39 minutes. He shot 11 for 27 from the field, 8 for 17 from 3, and he shot a perfect 2 for 2 from the foul line. Their starting power forward and former All-Star Pascal Siakam finished with 29 points, 10 rebounds, 7 assists, and 2 steals in 43 minutes. Siakam shot 8 for 18 from the field, 3 for 5 from 3, and he shot a perfect 10 for 10 from the foul line. With this win, the Toronto Raptors are now 20-17. That is the 7th best record in the Eastern Conference. They've won their last 6 games, and they've won 7 of their last 10. They currently sit 6 games behind the Bulls for the first seed in the Eastern Conference, just to get a sense of where they are. As they're taking a look now at what's going on with this loss, the New Orleans Pelicans are now 14-26. That is the 3rd worst record in the Western Conference, as they've lost 5 of their last 10 games. They sit 6 games behind the 8th seed Minnesota Timberwolves outside of the playoff picture. Taking a look now at what's going down in Houston, the Rockets hosted the Timberwolves. The Timberwolves would end up beating the Rockets 141-123. The T-Wolves won this matchup by 18 after they outscored the Rockets by 21 in the first half. The Rockets on the losing end of this matchup were led in scoring by their starting center, Christian Wood. Wood finished with 22 points and 8 rebounds, as well as 2 blocks in 28 minutes. He shot 8 for 16 from the field, 4 for 6 from 3, and 2 for 4 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Timberwolves were led in scoring by their elite starting center, Karl Anthony Towns. Towns finished with 40 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists in 33 minutes. He shot 15 for 25 from the field, 4 for 6 from 3, and 6 for 8 from the foul line. Their starting point guard, D'Angelo Russell, finished with 22 points, 5 rebounds, and 10 assists in 33 minutes. He shot 8 for 14 from the field, 5 for 9 from 3, and he made his only foul attempt of the day. Their starting power forward, Jared Vanderbilt out of Kentucky, finished with 21 points, 19 rebounds, 2 steals, and 2 blocks in 31 minutes. He shot 10 for 14 from the field. Their elite starting small forward out of Georgia, Anthony Edwards, finished with 19 points, 3 rebounds, and 6 assists, as well as 2 steals and 2 blocks in 34 minutes. He shot 7 for 17 from the field, 2 for 8 from 3, and a perfect 3 for 3 from the foul line. With this win, the Minnesota Timberwolves are now 20-20. That is the 8th best record in the West. They've won their last 4 games, and they've won 5 of their last 10. They sit 10.5 games behind the Golden State Warriors and the Phoenix Suns in the Western Conference. With this loss, the Houston Rockets are now 11-30. That is the worst record in the Western Conference for the time being. They've lost their last 2 games, and they've lost 9 of their last 10 as they've hit their 41 game point of the season, their exact halfway point. They sit 9.5 games behind the 8th seed Minnesota Timberwolves outside of the playoff picture. Taking a look now at what went down in Oklahoma City, the Thunder hosted the Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets would end up beating the Thunder 99-95. They would end up winning this matchup by 4 after they outscored the Thunder by 13 in the first half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Thunder were led in scoring by their starting small forward, Luguentz Dort. He finished with 14 points and 5 rebounds in 28 minutes as he shot 4 for 13 from the field, and he also shot 5 for 6 from the foul line. On the the winning end of this matchup, the Denver Nuggets were led in scoring by their elite starting center, Nikola Jokic, last year's MVP. Also, their shooting guard off the bench out of Duke, Austin Rivers. Jokic finished with 22 points, 18 rebounds, and 6 assists in 33 minutes. He shot 8 for 21 from the field, 1 for 3 from 3, and he shot a perfect 5 for 5 from the foul line. Austin Rivers finished with 22 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 steals in 32 minutes. He shot 8 for 13 from the field and 6 for 9 from 3. With this win, the Denver Nuggets are now 20-18. That is the 6th best record in the West. They've won their last 2 games and they've won 6 of their last 10. They sit 9.5 games behind the Golden State Warriors and the Phoenix Suns in the West. With this loss, the Oklahoma City Thunder are now 13-26. That is the 2nd worst record in the Western Conference. They've lost their last 4 games. They've lost 7 of their last 10, and they currently sit 6.5 games behind the 8th seed Minnesota Timberwolves outside of the playoff picture. Taking a look at what went down one state south in Dallas, the Mavericks hosted the Chicago Bulls. The Mavericks would end up beating the Bulls 113-99. They won this matchup by 14 after they outscored the Bulls by 15 in the second half. On the losing end, the Eastern Conference leaders were led in scoring by their starting small forward out of USC and their starting shooting guard out of UCLA. DeMar DeRozan finished with 20 points and 8 assists in 33 minutes as he shot 9 for 16 from the field and 2 for 4 from the foul line. Zach LaVine finished with 20 points and 2 steals in 35 minutes. He shot 7 for 21 from the field and a perfect 4 for 4 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Dallas Mavericks were led in scoring by their elite starting point guard out of Slovenia, Luka Doncic. He finished with 22 points, 14 rebounds, and 14 assists in 35 minutes. He shot 8 for 23 from the field, 2 for 6 from 3, and a perfect 4 for 4 from the foul line. With this win, the Dallas Mavericks are now 22-18. That is the 5th best record in the Western Conference as they've won their last 6 games. They've won 7 of their last 10. They sit 8.5 games behind the Warriors and Phoenix Suns in the Western Conference to get a sense of where they are, as their 6-game winning streak is also the 2nd longest winning streak in the Western Conference, and it's tied with the 76ers and the Raptors for the 2nd longest winning streak in all of the NBA. With this loss, the Chicago Bulls are now 26-11. That ended the longest winning streak in basketball, which was a 9-game winning streak, as they've only lost 1 of their last 9 games. They sit a game and a half ahead of the second place Brooklyn Nets in the Eastern Conference. Taking a look now at what went down in San Francisco, the Golden State Warriors hosted the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Warriors were able to beat the Cavs 96-82 to retain at least a chunk of the best lead in basketball, or the best record in basketball, as they still remain with with a single-digit amount of losses this season. As Klay Thompson made his return finally, the Warriors won this matchup 96-82. They won it by 14 after they outscored the Cavs by 14 in the 3rd quarter. I guess the 1st, 2nd, and 4th quarters were all even at that point. On the losing end of this matchup, the Cavaliers were led in scoring by their starting forward, Lamar Stevens. Stevens would go on to finish with 17 points and 2 steals, in 34 minutes. He shot 8 for 11 from the field, and he made his only foul attempt of the night. On the winning end of this matchup, the Golden State Warriors were led by their goated starting point guard, Stephen Curry, out of Davidson. He finished with 28 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and 5 turnovers in 37 minutes. He shot 10 for 21 from the field and 4 for 11 from 3, as he shot a perfect 4 for 4 from the foul line. Their elite starting shooting guard out of Washington State, Klay Thompson, would finish with 17 points and 3 rebounds in his first official NBA game back since the 2019 NBA Finals, when Kawhi Leonard was a member of the Raptors. He did all this. He finished with 17 points in 20 minutes as he shot 7 for 18 from the field. He shot 3 for 8 from 3. With this win, the Golden State Warriors are now 30-9. They are tied with the Phoenix Suns for the best record in the Western Conference. The Warriors have won 6 of their last 10. They and the Suns sit 2.5 games ahead of the 3rd seed Utah Jazz at the moment, the 3rd place Utah Jazz. With this loss, the Cleveland Cavaliers are now 22-18. That is the sixth best record in the Eastern Conference. They've lost 6 of their last 10 games. They trail the Chicago Bulls by 5.5 games in pursuit for the East Conference's best record. Taking a look now at what went down in Portland, the Trailblazers hosted the Sacramento Kings. The Trailblazers would end up beating the Kings 103-88. They won this matchup by 15 after they outscored the Kings by 6 in the first half and by 7 in the second by a combined 13 in this first half. On the losing end of this matchup, the Kings were led in scoring by their starting point guard, Tyrese Halliburton. Halliburton finished with 17 points, 9 assists, and 2 steals in 35 minutes. He shot 6 for 11 from the field, 2 for 6 from 3, and 3 for 4 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Trailblazers were led in scoring by their starting shooting guard, Anthony Simons. He finished with 31 points and 6 assists in 35 minutes. He shot 10 for 17 from the field as he shot 7 for 11 from 3 and a perfect 4 for 4 from the foul line. With this win, the Portland Trailblazers are now 15-24. That is the 5th worst record in the West, also tied with the Spurs for the 10th best record in the West. They've won 4 of their last 10 games. They sit 4.5 games behind the 8th seed Minnesota Timberwolves for the time being. With this loss, the Sacramento Kings are now 16-26. That is the 4th worst record in the Western Conference as they've lost their last 4 games. They've lost 7 of their last 10. They sit 5 games behind the 8th seed Minnesota Timberwolves outside of the Western Conference playoff picture. And then last but not least, taking a look at the second game that took place in the Crypto.com arena, the Los Angeles Lakers hosted the Memphis Grizzlies. The Grizzlies would end up beating the Lakers 127-119. They won this matchup by 8 after they outscored the Lakers by 13 in the second quarter and by 11 in the third, outscoring them by 24 points in the middle 2 quarters. On the losing end of this matchup at home, the Lakers were led in scoring by their goated small forward, LeBron James. LeBron finished with 35 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists in 33 minutes. He shot 14 for 19 from the field, 3 for 4 from 3, and a perfect 4 for 4 from the foul line. Their elite starting point guard, Russell Westbrook, finished with 6 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists in 26 minutes. He shot 2 for 12 from the field and a perfect 2 for 2 from the foul line. On the winning end of this matchup, the Memphis Grizzlies were led in scoring by their starting shooting guard out of TCU, Desmond Bane. Bane finished with 23 points and 3 steals in 26 minutes. He shot 9 for 14 from the field and 5 for 8 from the 3-point line. Their starting power forward, Jaren Jackson Jr., finished with 21 points, 12 rebounds, and 6 blocks in 29 minutes. He shot 7 for 14 from the field and 6 for 7 from the foul line. Their elite starting point guard, Ja Morant, finished with 16 points, 5 rebounds, and 7 assists in 31 minutes. He shot 4 for 10 from the field and he shot 8 for 12 from the foul line. With this win, the Memphis Grizzlies are now 28-14. That is the 4th best record in the Western Conference, as they are now the holders of the longest winning streak in the NBA now that the Bulls have lost a game. They've won 9 of their last 10 games because that's how a 9-game winning streak works, and they sit 3.5 games behind the Golden State Warriors and the Phoenix Suns for the Western Conference lead. With this loss, the Los Angeles Lakers are now 21-20. That is the 7th best record in the West as they've lost 5 of their last 10. They sit 10 games behind the Golden State Warriors and the Phoenix Suns for the outright lead for the Western Conference. So that's how the NBA is looking following yesterday's performances. Taking a look at what's going on today, starting off with the primetime games. At 7 o'clock, the Charlotte Hornets, the current holders of the 8th best record in the Eastern Conference, are going to host the defending champs Milwaukee Bucks, who hold the 4th best record in the East. That matchup is going to be on NBA TV. Looking at the games that aren't on primetime, at 7 o'clock, the Detroit Pistons are going to host the Utah Jazz. The Pistons hold the 2nd worst record in the NBA. The Boston Celtics are going to host the Indiana Pacers at 7:30. The New York Knicks are going to host the San Antonio Spurs in Madison Square Garden at 7:30 as well. At 8 o'clock, the Houston Rockets are going to host the Philadelphia 76ers in the Toyota Center as the Rockets hold the worst record in the West. At 10 o'clock, the Sacramento Kings are going to host the Cleveland Cavaliers in the Golden One Center. And last but not least, at 10 o'clock, as a makeup game, the Portland Trailblazers are going to host the Brooklyn Nets in the Moda Center. So that is what basketball is looking like. Taking a look at what's going on in the world of soccer. Starting off with the English matchups that took place in the English FA Cup. Starting off in Liverpool, they were able to beat Shrewsbury Town in this English FA Cup third round matchup 4-1. Their first goal coming from Kaide Gordon after Daniel Udo scored the first goal for Shrewsbury Town. Fabinho would score a penalty kick to put Liverpool up 2-1. And after Firmino's 78th minute goal, Fabinho would make it a brace in the 93rd minute, so Liverpool would advance to the next round. Now taking a look at what went down in the London matchup, the Tottenham Hotspurs faced off against Morecambe, and Tottenham Hotspur was able to make it through. Their third goal, after Morecambe scored the lone goal of the first half, Tottenham would tie it up in the 74th off of a goal from Harry Winks, off of an amazing set kick equalizer. Lucas Moura would score in the 85th minute to put Tottenham up by 1, and then Harry Kane would put the cherry on top with an 88th minute goal to put Tottenham up 3-1. So Tottenham will advance to the next round of this tournament. And then Arsenal ended up losing their matchup to Nottingham Forest as the lone goal came in the 83rd minute from Louis Graban, as Arsenal has been officially eliminated. Taking a look at what went down in Spanish La Liga, Atletico Madrid would draw against Villarreal, the reigning Europa League champs, as Atletico Madrid would score the very first game's goal from Angel Correa. Villarreal would tie it in the 29th minute from Pau Torres. In the 58th minute, Alberto Moreno's 58th minute goal would put them up by 1. And Geoffrey Kondogobia's 67th minute goal would tie Atletico Madrid at least right there for the time being. Of course, with this draw, Atletico Madrid is now sitting 4th in the table as Villarreal now sits 8th. Atletico Madrid is currently sitting 16 points below Real Madrid, so it doesn't look as though this may be a season where Atletico Madrid repeats as La Liga champs at this point. But that is how far ahead Real Madrid is at the moment. But Atletico Madrid drawing when they really should have probably been getting that win. Taking a look at Serie A, AC Milan was able to beat Venezia 3-0. Their first goal coming from Zlatan Ibrahimovic, one of the greatest soccer players to ever play the game. And then they would get 2 goals from their French defender, Theo Hernandez, in the second half. Their third goal, or Theo's second goal, being a penalty kick, putting them up 3-0. With this win, AC Milan is sitting second in the Serie A table as they sit 1 point below Inter Milan with one more game, having played one more game than Inter Milan has played at this point. Continuing on, Napoli was able to beat Sampdoria 1-0 as their lone goal came in the 43rd minute from Patania. With this win, Napoli sits 3rd in Serie A as they sit 6 points below first place Inter with one more match played. Juventus faced off against AS Roma in Rome, and they were able to pull off a 4-3 win in one of the craziest matchups you'll see. AS Roma was up 3-1 going after their 53rd minute goal. Locatelli would put Juventus down by 2. Kulusevski would tie it up 2 minutes later, and then Descolio would finish in the 77th minute to put Juve up by 1 to give them the 3 points. Now Juve is sitting 5th in Serie A, sitting 3 points below 4th place Atalanta. Atalanta's coming off of a 6-2 win against Udinese, as they got 2 goals from Muriel, and they had 5 different goal scorers. Internazionale faced off against Lazio, and they were able to pull off a 2-1 win as Lazio would tie the game up with Ciro Immobile in the 35th minute, but Skriniar would finish with the 67th minute goal to put Inter up 2-1. Right now, they sit 1 point clear of Milan with one less game played, giving them a little bit of extra space. And then taking a look at what went down in Ligue 1, PSG faced up against Olympique Lyonnais. Lyon would score the first goal in the 77th minute from Lucas Paqueta, and PSG would score an equalizer in the 75th minute with Thilo Kehrer. The game would finish as a 1-1 draw. At the moment, PSG sits first by a wide margin, sitting 11 points clear of second place Nice and Olympique Marseille, who is tied with them. So right now, that is how the matchups are looking as we lead into today. And of course, looking at the soccer matchups that are taking place today on a Monday, not very many, but there is a big matchup as Manchester United will face off against Aston Villa for this third round matchup. So that'll be Of course, it'll be a big test to see where Manchester United are at this point in the year. But with that said, I want to thank everyone for tuning in to all 72, 73 minutes of this piece. Today is the last day of yesterday was the last day of the NFL season. So I do think it's kind of worth getting into everything that I'm really getting into. And once all of today's exhibitions and matchups are done, I'm going to come back tomorrow on Tuesday, January 11th for another episode of this piece. I want to thank everyone once again. I hope all is well, and I will catch you with another episode tomorrow. Thanks for listening to my piece. I hope all is well, and peace out.